Hello, everyone. I'm Randall Stroop. Welcome. I'm at my home and music studio near Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I'm preparing a short video to talk about a new work that I've done called JUDASKUSS, or The Kiss of Judas. It's for SATB Divisi. A short time back, I musically analyzed three historical characters. One was Mary, one was Peter, and one was Judas. Of course, these three really different characters intersected and collided in history for an epic event, the crucifixion. The first person I'll talk about is Judas, not from a perspective of religion, but more from a perspective of a character study of his motivation for betraying Jesus. Was it the 30 pieces of silver or was it something else? And I found a wonderful poem that sort of put a different perspective on it than what we might normally think. I found also that the idea of Judas was a bit of a taboo topic relative to choral music anyway. And I found it just an interesting study to be kind of a part of that. At its most basic level, though, Judas is just a good description of what, good over evil or protagonist over antagonist, making decisions what might be good for society or what may be good for ourselves. And this whole idea of that yin and yang that we all have gone through and will go through in our lifetimes. So this is a presentation that I did recently for a group on this JUDASKUSS. I'd like to share it with you now. Of course, Judas was a disciple and revealed Jesus' identity to the Roman soldiers when he greeted Jesus with a kiss, and in doing so betrayed him. As such, the name Judas is often used or synonymously with traitor or treason. So let's talk a little bit about JUDASKUSS and isolate two sections of the work that fuel the rest of the piece. Well, there's an antagonist and a protagonist in this. They represent Judas, his mental state, if you will. On the one hand, he's a follower of Jesus and all the teachings that he's been through. On the other, that's pulling him this way, is the world, the materialistic part. He's getting paid 30 pieces of silver if he will betray Jesus. So he's got this inner conflict going on. So the protagonist I'm using here is actually a canon or a round, a tune by Richard Woodward. He's an 18th century organist who actually worked at Christ Church in Dublin. When I conducted there a few years ago, I saw that on the back wall of the church, and I read up on why that would be there. And this is Richard Woodward's tune, and when he died, the church dedicated this to him. He was a rock star in Europe at the time as an Anglican organist, and so this was his dedication. So when I saw that, I took a picture of it, and I integrated it then into this piece as the protagonist. And this is the tune. The antagonist, on the other hand, is the poetry of Joseph Weinheber. He's the author of the poem JUDASKUSS. Weinheber was an orphan of the early 20th century. He's from Germany. As he grew older, he became very disillusioned with society as a whole. He switched religions several times, as well as political movements. He was constantly in turmoil. His life ended in suicide in 1945. JUDASKUSS is an incredible poem, however, and it's very thought-provoking and shows a lot of inner turmoil, both within the context of that kind of epic work and also within Weinheber's life himself. And so I use that as the antagonist. It's juxtaposed then with this wonderful melody that we just heard. So this is the sound of the antagonist. It's 4 notes. And then they turn into sort of a random mix, like someone who is very confused in their mind. And then over the top of that comes in our protagonist, or that innocence, that tune that's reminding him of good, of what's right in the world, why he's being drawn on the other side by these 4 notes. So here's together, he's got this conflict. it just sort of muddies the water. Nothing is actually very clear to him. It's just murky. And so then the third part of this, very briefly, is this culminates in this sort of cataclysmic outcry, and that's at bar 23 if you were looking at a score. But it's this agitato section, which says in German, it says, bittere Reue, Scham und Gram. And it says, you bitter regret, shame and sorrow. So he's feeling remorseful on the one hand, and he's feeling justified actually in his decision on the other. And you get this 9/8 rhythm, which is rollicky. Again, he's being pulled both directions with this bass, which goes, and then the right hand, and together it's. So let's hear a little bit of this, how this all works from a choral perspective in this example being played now. The final section of Judaskuss is on bar 81 of your score. I chose to use English in several places on the ending here. The audience and performers need to be absolutely clear on what the message is and what the various characters are. And I thought mixing the languages German and English in kind of a macaronic style, as they call it, would be really effective here. You may remember that I said earlier that Judas, at least represented by Weinheber's poem, is quite defensive about his betrayal of Jesus and really feeling quite justified in his actions of doing so. Here's the English translation of a few stanzas here at the end, in which Judas is stating that he's feeling trapped by the scriptures, that someone had to fulfill the scriptures about Jesus being betrayed, and it just so happened to be him, really against his will, and he had to fulfill that role. He says, you only see the cursed money which I took, and say nothing about the fact that he, being Jesus, gave me to eat at the meal. To fulfill the scriptures, I had to be the go-between. He urged me to do it soon, so I had to go. He knew it all before. So Jesus saw me coming and said, before I had time to think, you betray me with a kiss. So I kissed him. And then he says at the end, he gave me my fate. Jesus died for you on the cross. I went out instead and hanged myself. So the way that this ending is set up then, with that in mind, that he has these three characters, as I mentioned. He knew it all before. So the tenor ones and alto twos, very deliberate, very indicting. There's no room for conversation here. It's what it is. And then right above that comes in the sopranos with our melody. Remember the canon of our protagonist, Woodward. And the antagonist reminds him of Judas. So these three together, it sounds a bit like this. And then so again, even to the end, Judas is arguing with himself, either trying to convince himself or trying to convince us that he was justified in his actions. And then toward the very end, you'll see that this kind of Sturm und Drang, this storm and stress, comes back, and he's got this. Remember a melody earlier. So it's So it's got that he's arguing in his mind, and then his response, and this is really hair-raising at the end. He says, Jesus died on the cross, and then this is what I did, Judas says. I went out and hanged myself. It's like I went, and then out, and this is angular here. Hanged myself. A really kind of like water in the face right there. And maybe that's the only way that he could ever feel like he could relieve himself of all of this stress, was just to kill himself. And then the last statement, Judas. So let's hear the MP4 of the ending of Judaskuss.